So 10-second break. Well, good evening, everyone. Episode 99. And we've we've sort of been saying it a bit lately. We're still making plans for the 100th. We've had so many different ideas over the years, but this personally is a very special one for me. Lukey's not here tonight. He's done that many trips and taken that many 100,000 photographs in the last 6 months that he's had to put his head down and strap himself to a chair and disappear from the world to catch up with all the clients that are screaming at him for his work. So that's the flip side of being a working photographer as opposed to just doing it for the love. So hats off to Lukey, and he's definitely keen and on board for the 100 shows. So which actually is probably going to be a day early next time, and we're looking at doing it on the 29th on the Tuesday, because Luke and I are actually heading to King Island to run a workshop, and neither of us have been there before, so we're pretty excited. But we're literally on a plane flying to a remote island off northwest Tasmania on the night of the 30th. So yeah, we've got a few. We'll hopefully have a few drop-ins and have a good time reflecting on what has been quite an amazing 2.5 years now, Nick. I think. Yeah, the old. It was 6 shows initially, as you well know. We kind of got a bit carried away. So yeah, Nick, just the latest news I think it's interesting to discuss is the announcement of the NLPA awards last night, the Natural Landscape Photography Awards, which as a show in particular, we've had the organizers of the show on it, and we've done review shows of it before, and we feel there's a wonderfully beautiful parallel between the ethics and principles behind that competition and what we stand for as a show and as individuals ourselves. So it's been quite a wonderful fit. I was lucky enough to win a category first crack round last time in the aerial category, and I just literally just got my book. It took a year, so I was just reading what I wrote. So, oh yeah. And our guest tonight actually got second in the aerial category. Hats off. We'll get to him in a second. And congratulations to one of our great show friends, Miko Boynton, who won the I think it was intimate and detail section. And same image that beat me at the what was it, the New Zealand awards. Yeah, I was in the finalist realm with Mika, and this one image just screamed out to the judges, and they went crazy and gave it a gold distinction. And it's called Deity, I believe, or Geisha. I'm trying to remember.
Geisha, I think.
And the same image has risen to the top of a very esteemed panel of judges like that. Well, the caliber of judges they have is probably second to none in the world, I think, particularly for more purist landscape photography. So congratulations to all the winners. Also a good show friend Tim Rake got fourth in the project category as well, which is pretty excited about. And that's for very recent work that he did a lot of this year, I believe, with his fancy. I wish I had 100 megapixel Fuji camera that I sat next to on another project we did together for a week earlier this year. Yeah, so I'm what am I doing? I had a bit of a break actually. I went over to Mariah Island and did some shooting for myself, which I haven't done for a while. And I borrowed a whole bunch of really fancy gear from Canon. The new RF lenses, 100 to 500 and 15 to 35, and I really wanted to put them through their paces and see if they're worth upgrading to. So I gave them an absolute hammering. And growling. So I went down to Growling Swallow actually as well with Luke Sharkey and Ben Mays and Ben Good. They were doing some project work and filming each other doing some. Well, I won't say actually. It's up to them to announce when that's coming out. And I kind of came along for the ride, and then yeah, just the water was pumping, and Growling Swallow is an incredible place within the Florentine in the southwest, and I actually ended up staying a bit longer and heading out into the southwest out to Mount Ed and spending a bit of time down there and shooting as well, which is yeah, actually I haven't been to for a long time. I was one of those crazy people that did Mount Ed in a day when I was younger, which I don't recommend.
No.
It's there's a lot of up and down in one day. It's just say my legs weren't working too well the next day. But Nick, how have you been traveling, mate?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. Yeah, been a stressful time in general at work, and and life and all that. I actually went away to the southwest myself for 2 nights very recently, and I did take my camera, but I didn't take any pictures. I
Really?
actually spent my time sitting in a spot that I knew that absolutely no one would bother me, and I set up my tent, and I pretty much read books for 2 days, and thoroughly
Wow.
enjoyed myself, and it was a good reset for me. It wasn't somewhere that was particularly photogenic, although I could have made the most of it and done some detail work in the area. But it it was really just I just had to get away from people for a bit and just enjoy the noise of the birds, which is pretty much all I heard for 2 days. And yeah, I had a good time. It was something I really needed, and I do really need to get some photography done in the not too distant future. And so, I'm hoping with some leave coming up from work shortly, I might be able to get something done. Yeah, the Natural Landscape Awards is such an amazing competition to have evolved in 2 years to what it's become. Even I mean, certainly in the first year it was an instant hit, and the second year has been exactly the same, and it's so beautifully received and so beautifully run. And congratulations to everyone who entered that, and everyone that came out with some prizes, and yeah, some fantastic work. And I think, Paul, we may end up talking a bit more about it on our 100th show, maybe dig through it a little bit. We're certainly not digging through it tonight, but
Yeah.
certainly wanted to congratulate a couple of locals, particularly Mika. I mean, that's an outstanding image that's is called it's called Geisha, or excuse me, Ocean Deity,
Yeah.
as a secondary image, and it's just a stunning aerial shot with this amazing face in the beach and the sand, and it's just the most amazing thing about it is that it's real. It was actually there, and she saw it, and she photographed it, and she's presented it like this. And yeah, look, honestly, Paul, I think she probably deserved to beat you in the New Zealand Awards.
Yeah. It's a stunning image.
Yeah, yeah, and it is. I mean, it's just it's a personification of landscape with such a figure in it, and we'll talk about it more maybe in a couple of weeks' time for the
It was
100th show.
it was it was a bit of a tough reminder of the judging process because I actually had in the same judging room as that image in the New Zealand Awards was my image that won the aerial category in NLPA, and it bombed. Got like an 82. And well,
Wow.
it's not bombed by New Zealand standards, so it was actually quite hard to get. But
Yeah.
it was sort of I was sort of hesitantly waiting for something to happen, and it was just like next. No, no, he made a comment, and I was just like, all right. And then I think the next image was Mika's, and I was like, oh, that's how it rolls.
Look, I mean, I think, and obviously we'll talk to Renee about this shortly, but aerial photography and aerial abstract photography is a very interesting genre, and we've talked about it a lot on the show, and it's something that I personally don't do, but very much admire. But I honestly think that it does suffer from a little bit of overload at times, where there are so many extremely high quality abstract aerials out there now that images that on their own, printed and on the wall, are just going to blow you away. But when seen in saturation of a lot of images, can sometimes dilute what you're seeing just by overexposure to it. And I'd be interested to hear more about those
Yeah, I
thoughts.
it's funny enough because I've done a lot. I actually just judged the 360 awards as well actually last week with Jackie Rankin and Richard Ianson, and it's I don't feel that way myself, and I've judged so many things. I arguably judge as much as anyone
Mm.
around here, and I guess I don't feel that way myself. And actually, what really surprised me is there was even more aerial work that rose to the top in the NLPA awards than there was the year before,
Mm.
which kind of suggests otherwise. So
Yeah.
so so anyway, that's it's artist judging art, so it's always the roll of the dice. But I found that interesting that and all the awards that are out there, NLPA awards, that there's a lot more aerial imagery at the top than I saw at all last year. So that parallel is going to take us over to our wonderful guest, I think. So René Algesheimer, I hope I said that pretty well, who now lives in the French part of Switzerland, actually. I've been trying to get, hoping to get Renee on for about half a year now or more. And one of the many, many reasons is he's a very exceptional person and has a unique place, I think, in the international landscape photography community because of his incredible diversity, the way his mind works, the way he sees, the way he interacts with people, the way he works visually, and photography is only a small aspect of his life and what he does. I guess from a day-to-day perspective, I don't know if that's fair to say. We'll find out more if that's true. But he's a professor and an educator and a mentor and a coach. He's worked in high-end academic realms and still does. He's a working professor as it is now. And he's just produced an incredible book, Voice of the Eyes, which I don't think many people have taken on a project like this or even had the privilege, as it were, to delve into the minds of such a wide array of the current sort of operating higher echelon of landscape photographers around the world. And it'll be interesting to see what criteria that Renee used to choose and select who was in there and why Nick and Luke and I went in there. But I had to say that.
Got to know the person first.
but,
I think that's the
but,
most important thing.
but I mean, and I'm really quite fascinated to see because it's like Renee's actually delayed the purchasing of it deliberately, partly because of the show and to give our guests another week to get the pre-purchase order, which is going to be less expensive. So it's very generous of him. And I'm really interested to go through some of Renee's background and some of his work, but also we are going to spend quite a bit of time tonight talking about this incredible project because there's really not a lot like it in the world, and there's so much we can delve into in and around it. And I'm quite curious how that's influenced Rene himself, let alone sort of the impact it's going to have around the world and ripple effects of getting people to be a lot more conscious and aware of about how they apply themselves in the landscape realm. And there's a lot of parallels with Rene. I think he's a part of a group called Nature First, which Matt Payne and a lot of great crew in America have organized in 2019, I believe, to really stand up for and create a lot of clarity and intentionality around the role of photography in terms of conservation and being very present and aware and conscious about how and what is photographed and how it's presented in terms of limiting its impact on the natural places that we know and love that give us these opportunities in the first place, which I know is a deep passion of Nick's as well. So that's probably enough from me, Renee. I'd love you to introduce yourself and anything you like to sort of start the ball rolling with this evening. Thank you again. He's live from Switzerland. It's in the morning over there, and we had a bit of back and forth about the timing, and very luckily I checked about 10 minutes before the show, and we both had the timing wrong by an hour. So luckily we fixed that up pretty quick. And we just had the change of daylight savings, so it threw us out on both ends a little bit. So bonjour, René.
Thanks a lot, and really appreciate your introduction. And although I'm not that interested to talk about titles and backgrounds, but more interested to talk about photography and what drives and motivates the photography. But I'm really humbled to be on your channel, looking at all the other people that participated already in your channel makes me very humble and to be invited. And I think you're doing a great service to the landscape community, and I wish you have even more engagement and followers there, because I think it is very important that we have a place where we can talk about our voice that we have in the landscape, in which we can talk about our intent and why we do photography. And I think the why rarely comes through. So we just see the outcome, but we often don't understand why the photographer does the image. And that was also basically the motivation for me to create the book. We'll talk about the book a little bit later on, probably.
Yeah, the magic question, why? I think you're right, Renee. It's not really given the voice it deserves, I think, a lot of the time, and there's a lot of assumptions made in and around it, and sometimes incorrectly with artists that can be a little bit misunderstood in terms of the what, the why, and how that's behind a lot of imagery. And yeah, I'm definitely going to indulge in this book and spend a lot of time with it, because a lot of those photographers are people that I personally are quite inspired by, and a lot of them I don't know actually, and I would like to learn about. I personally came into the realm of photography outside of really any influence at all, really. I didn't know any photographers or didn't look at any work for at least a good decade or so while I was shooting. And it's only been in the last 10, 12 years that's been had an influence on myself, and a very welcome influence, to be honest. But I also love that the bedrock of my motivation and the why had really nothing to do with anybody else, and I wasn't comparing myself to anybody else at the time. And I find that I lean back on that a little bit as well, especially in this realm of just existential comparison that just screams out at us every single day. It's a bit overwhelming at times, and sometimes I've got to switch off, because that realm of comparison has its downsides, and I think psychologically as well. And so that could be interesting to bounce off your thoughts around the social media aspect of that as well at some stage, Renee.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about, but I think coming back to the book, I think what we often see is just the outcome of our work. But what happens is that many photographers, they chose the medium of photography because they're probably not that good in words, and in order to describe their motivation and the why they are doing the images. And so my thought of creating this book basically was giving them a voice for the eyes. And so in order to see and understand basically how they captured the images, what their intent behind this. And so I hope that the book in itself is becoming a voice and for these other photographers. But we can talk about the motivation and the whole setup of the book and a little bit later, because I think it is quite important to understand the way how I think in order to understand how the book has been created. Just to kick it off, to introduce myself. So my name is René Algesheimer. I'm living in Switzerland, actually in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. In my main time, I'm a university professor, and my background is in math and music, actually. And so I'm also talking about this diversity a little later on. And you introduced me as that it is a gift having all these different backgrounds. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later on why I'm struggling with this as well, and almost all the time. And but yes, I'm very thankful. I'm working at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. I'm super happy to have a group of young, talented people that I'm able to supervise. And it's a fantastic group, and we do research basically on networks and on social influence and diffusion processes. And we look into how human values and sustainability diffuses over the network. So that's my main part of the work. Photography started for me seriously in 2015. And although my father always used the camera, but because as a kid, I was almost always kind of the object of his photography. So I only saw the result, but I didn't understand the process. And then in 2015, I think I needed some kind of escape from my professional life, which was very intense. And so I rediscovered photography. And in 2015, I decided to go to a workshop because I wanted to see the glacier caves in Iceland. And I went to a workshop. I took the images of the ice caves in Iceland, and then I looked at the images of the others, and I recognized, mine are looking completely different than the ones from the others. And what am I doing wrong? And so it happened in 2015 that I realized that there is software such as Photoshop and Lightroom, and that you can work on images. So that was a big surprise to me. And so my background is a little bit more on the analog side in photography. And so that was the beginning. And since then, I basically invested every free second that I have into photography. It has become super important and meaningful for me. So it is my passion number one at the moment, and I adore really everything about photography. And I think also that my own work has quite changed over the last years. I've calmed down myself in the last year completely from social media because I needed to find my own identity. And I think I had too much noise, too much information overload from the outside in order to be able to focus on myself. And I decided not to be a victim of the algorithms on different platforms. And so I'm just coming back from the mountains. So I decided to do a 2-month retreat in the mountains just by myself. And so without electricity, without connectivity, I stayed in an isolated mountain hut for 2 months and at around 2,000 meters. And I recognized the first snow there. And so the idea was not, I'm on sabbatical leave at the moment at the university. And that's a time that is dedicated for creating new ideas for research. And usually professors, they go to other places and other universities, to MIT or Berkeley and Stanford. And I decided not to do that because it would just increase the noise and the information overload, new people, new environments. And I just wanted to do the opposite, just decrease the noise in order to be able to listen to myself. And so this is what I did in the last 2 months. And I had the camera with me. I think I've started new projects there. And I'm super happy that I reconnected to my inner self. And yeah, so I'm here.
Oh, that's excellent. Was that in Switzerland that you managed to get into the mountains?
Yes, it was a neighboring valley of the Mont Blanc, but still in Switzerland. And it is actually a valley that is a little bit unknown in Switzerland because there's no skiing area at all. So it's very wild. And so for Swiss kind of circumstances, it is wild. Mm. And and I wanted to isolate myself. And I chose a place where I could avoid meeting too many people. And yes, it was still in Switzerland.
Renee, did you have a daily practice at all, or any sort of ritual that you fell into over that time?
Yes, I had. These daily practices are super important to me. And I'm a person who needs structure in a sense. And when you are isolated in the mountains, I mean, the first 3-4 days, they were amazing. I recognized, no schedule, no meetings, no to-do lists. That was amazing. But then after the 4th day, I recognized, I'm missing the social contacts. I miss to talk to people. And so then that's where structure comes in, and structure is very important to me. So I have a daily routine, a morning routine. And so when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do basically is I have some breathing techniques and meditations that I apply. And so I was sitting outside the hut and I was listening to the birds again and to looking into nature, meditating. Then I have a stretching unit where I stretch my body and look into the mobility of my body. And I have a session of gratitude where I'm saying thank you for all the beautiful things that I'm able to recognize and that happened to me. The last thing is a journaling. So every morning I forced myself to write down at least 3 pages into my journal without thinking. I was just sitting down and writing whatever came to my mind. And then I started to make the fire in the fireplace because it was quite cold. I made a coffee. I had a coffee, and that was the morning routine.
Well, it sounds like a pretty good routine to me, and one that we could all aspire to if we could just get away from that noise, even for a short period of time. Sounds like a great thing to do. But you're really going to develop your own ideas in a situation like that. You've got no outside influences except for what's literally around you. Did you find with, clearly you were doing some thinking about your professional work, being on a sabbatical, but talk us through what you found with your photography and your ideas that were circulating being that isolated.
Sure. This is also part of my presentation that I have a little later on.
Okay, sure.
But actually, the most important thing is that I found that everything is already there. And I think for many years, I have been desperately searching and for something. And in many photography channels, this is called the style. And I don't believe that much in style, because I think style is just an instrument I can apply based on the intention that I have. So I can apply different styles depending on the idea of a project. I will talk about that later on. And but what I was really searching for was the identity. And so, who am I as a person? What am I interested in? Why am I here on Earth? And so, what is my objective? And I believe that we all have one question in life that we try to answer. And I really wanted to find out, what is the question for me? And so I've recognized that in the early years of my photography, and so I had a late start in 2015. But in the beginning, I think you do all these technical things, and all your images are oversaturated in the beginning, and you have too much contrast, and you need to learn all the basics in order to play with your images. You learn compositions, and you learn how to read the light and all these other things. But then at a certain point, and this is what I recognized with many others, that it shouldn't stop there. You shouldn't kind of prioritize the technology over kind of the intent. And so I was criticizing myself, because I recognized, okay, I have nice decorating images for the walls, but what's the intent? Why did I create the images? And so I wanted to have more depth and into my images. And so therefore I decided, okay, I need to make a full stop. I need to stop publishing work on social media, and I need to find myself first. I need to connect to my inner self and finding this intent and this identity. And I think after this time in the mountains, I've recognized that all is already there if we just give ourselves permission to listen to us. And very often we just don't listen. We have a profession, we have a business to do, we have families, and we have friends, and life is so hectic. And especially after COVID, first we had the COVID crisis, and now we have all kind of crises all over the world. And it's very difficult to become not depressed by all these things going on, and just to listen to yourself and be open to what you'll see and what you'll identify. And so basically this is what I mainly discovered. It's a very simple takeaway, but for me it's a very powerful takeaway.
Are you open to sharing the question that you found, or is that something you want to do later on?
I'm not sure that I have already found it, and but you'll see already from the title of my presentation that I'm on the way. I would say that I'm heading towards that question, but I'm not yet there. It has partly to do with the different backgrounds that I have. And throughout my life, I felt kind of puzzled, because I'm a person who has a very strong rational side, and which is very analytical, very structured. But on the other hand, I'm also a very sensible person, and I have a very strong emotional side. And so very often these two sides, they are kind of fighting with each other. And so they are in discourse. And so I'd like to bring in the harmony, and I'd like to find out that the whole of both sides is more than the sum of its parts. And so that is a very important thing for me. So the acceptance that I am who I am, and that I am variety, that I'm probably different things. And so this self-acceptance, self-love also is very important, I think. And so one question may be that, how am I able to connect these two different sides and use them as the nutrition, the food, in order to create artistic work?
Well, wow. Did you want to get started with your presentation then?
Of course, I can. Yeah, happy to do so. And please interrupt me at any stage. And if you have any question or if things are not clear.
Oh, don't worry, we will.
I'm really looking forward to this.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the title of my presentation is I, Me, and Myself. And I'm going to tell you a little later on the deeper meaning of that. But you can already probably smell that I'm a split personality who has kind of different perspectives, and I want to give you different perspectives on me. And so it is a very honest presentation. And so I'm really talking about who I am and how I create the work that I work. And I'm really very thankful to have the opportunity to talk about my work.
As are we.
Okay, so the subtitle of my presentation is Working in Photographic Projects. And so I'd like to show you why I'm that motivated to work in kind of bigger projects, and that help me to create kind of different perspectives, tell deeper stories. And so basically that's my intent. And hopefully that's also a motivation and takeaway for everyone who listens to the channel. Okay, because I'm a researcher, I like to start with some working definitions and some literacy, because I think it is important to understand the way I think, probably, or the way I use different terms. So I personally differentiate between snapshots, images, and photographs. So the snapshots, those are kind of the everyday observations that we have. So there is no composition involved, there is no technique involved. Often I do them with my mobile phone, and often they don't have any meaning or emotional connection. So they are just protocols, visual protocols for my mind. So there is something that triggers me. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'd really like to fix it and have it for later in order to think about that. Images are on a slightly different level. So the images, there are occasional observations. They have a medium kind of level of composition technique involved, but they still don't have the intent or the deeper meaning. The photographs is the last kind of level in my process, where I try to not only optimize the composition, I really think about different techniques. But most important, I think about what's the deeper meaning and what's the emotional direction of my image. And so I'm using these kind of three different elements, and I'm playing around with all three of them. I would not say that photographs are more important than images or snapshots. And I think they all have their role, and they are all important for our process. Second thing I'd like to talk about is the way I differentiate between a collection, a series, and a project. So a collection for me is just a set of images, and often they have a similar main object or a theme, but they don't have a sequence. And so it's just that over the years you collect, for example, images of trees. And so they have a similar subject. And so that's the collection of tree images. Very often you also found books that just focus on collections. For example, there's the very famous series Des Oiseaux, so about the birds. And so a lot of famous photographers, also Michael Kenner, for example, Pentti Samalati, and many others, they've published books about the birds. And so it's just a collection of images about birds. A series is a set of photographs, but that follow a sequence. And so there you sequence your images, and in order to give them an order. So you want to probably tell a story by going through the different images. And a project, finally, is a set of photographs. And so here I use the term a photograph, because in a project, I really carefully think about which kind of photograph I'd like to add. It's also telling a story. It follows a sequence, but basically it follows a very important why. So there is an intent that I follow with this project. I'd like to show different perspectives in telling the story. It's not only one story, so it's not linear like a series, but sometimes it's a story that plays in parallel. And so I'm offering different angles towards kind of the story I'd like to tell. So finally, the difference between object and subject. So the objects for me are all kind of elements in nature that are visible to everyone. But the subjects, they are the interpretations of these objects, and they express then my emotions and the thoughts that I have. So if we have a collection of trees, for example, that's basically a collection of objects. And that is totally fine, and that could be very beautiful. But I recognized in the last years that that's not enough for me. I don't want to just have a collection of objects. And so I'm personally basically interested in the subject. And so I'm interested in, basically it's photography for me, and the arts in general is a way of a self-discovery of who you are and what your place in the world is. And so I'm more interested in the pure subject and making the images more personal, and rather than just kind of documenting what is there.
I've never seen anyone sort of lay it out like that before, but it makes perfect sense. It really does. That's really well thought out.
Yeah, I really enjoy, particularly that the last two. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of when you get into the higher realms of photography and people that have a lot of intentionality is just how much of themselves are in the images, and that's what makes it a subject more than an object. Is because they poured a lot of who they are and how they see, what they believe, and how they feel into it, and that somehow comes through, sometimes even unconsciously.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quote from my book, and Paul Kenny said, so the UK photographer, I'm a huge fan of his work. He differentiates between the optimizers and the makers. And so the optimizers are people who go to kind of iconic places and they want to optimize the image. So they seek out for the aurora behind the iconic place and the jumping dolphin and the rainbow. And so everything coming together. But this is just optimizing probably an image that already exists. However, the creators are those who are making work. And so Paul really is someone who was really making work, and his Salt series, for example, is amazing. And I think this is also quite interesting. And I think in the long run, I see myself much more on the maker side. But I think if you learn arts of photography, you probably start at the optimizer side. You follow others, you adopt other styles, and then you learn through that, and in order to find your own personal path.
Wow, what a beautifully simple, beautiful simplification of a lot of complex concepts. Very well done, sir.
I'll move forward to the next slide. So just jump in if you have a question. So usually the way I work in project is that I have an intent first. And so the intent can be top down or bottom up. And top down means usually whenever I do something not related to photography, being under the shower, playing with my kids, playing soccer, whatever, I have a question that comes to my mind. And the question is the starting point then for something that goes over into an intent. And then I recognize, oh, there's probably something of interest that I'd like to follow up, that I'd like to make a project on. In other cases, however, it appears to emerge bottom up, which means that I am in the field and I'm triggered by something. And then this by something, what triggers me, the subject I recognize in the field, is probably the starting point to create kind of a bigger intent and in order to create a project. But the intent is always kind of the first. Based on the intent, I try to bring in my own personal story and my history, my experiences that I have, my own identity. And so therefore, I think it is super important for me that we mix up the intent kind of with our personal identity. And finally, because of those two, and based on the intent that I have and based on the identity, I choose a visual strategy. So that is the visual style for my images. It's very much based on the intent that I have or the identity that I am. And so the outcome of a project and how the project looks like is very much based on the decision of how I'd like to make it look. And it is more like the identity where, from my personal humble understanding, where the signature of the photographer or the artist comes through. Here's a quote. A quote that I very much like by Charles Horton Cooley, who was a sociologist. I am not what you think I am. I am not who I think I am. I am who I think you think I am. And I like this quote very much because I recognize that was the beginning of my photography. And so in the beginning, I was more interested about how others perceive my photography. I was really seeking out for feedback. That's the reason why in the first years I sent out a lot of my work to competitions, because I was naive enough in the beginning to think that I receive a personal feedback of how I can improve. And then I recognized later on, okay, many of these competitions are just commercial kind of outlets. But I think the last sentence in this was very true, that I am not who I think I am, or maybe I don't even have a connection to myself. But I was really seeking out for the outside perspective of me as a person. So why did I choose the title I, Me, and Myself? And because I think it describes my path into photography. In the beginning, I was basically, I saw myself as being the subject. So I am making the photograph. So we use the word I when we refer to a subject. I make the photograph. And in the beginning, I really believed that, okay, I'm the maker of the photograph. A little later on, I recognized that it's probably not me. In the end, it is me making the photograph, but there's something else that triggers me to make the photograph. And I recognized, so it's more like the object. I am the object. I'm just reacting by whatever triggers me to make the photograph. And finally, I recognized, okay, in the last years, maybe it's reflexive in the way that I am triggered by an object, but then I make the photograph in order to discover and express something about myself. And so this is actually where I am. And so the title that I chose is basically describing my personal path into photography from the subject towards the self-reflexive process. And so in the following, I'm going to introduce you quickly to 4 different projects that I've worked on in the past. And I also start with the early ones in order to show a little bit the development and the thoughts that went into kind of these different images.
It's quite amazing reading what you've put down in words there. You obviously have a deep way of thinking about putting into words what others just don't know how to conceptualize. I mean, just when you've written that down, and I'm going, oh yeah, I've been through that same thing myself, but I didn't know what I was actually going through. And now I'm at the point similar to where you are, but I didn't know that because I couldn't really put it into a theory. And it's, you know, actually seeing that written down, it's really resonating with me. That's probably what I'm trying to say. I'm not the greatest putting words on the page, but that really does reflect with me, and I'm sure our viewers as well.
I'd like to see you and Guy Tal get together. That would be interesting.
I know Guy personally, and we had also many interesting discussions. He is a wonderful person.
His work and his words are just amazing. Yeah. Really amazing.
I'll let you talk about this quote, and then I'd love to share a very significant one of my own that has an overlay and parallel to this one after you talk about it.
Please. This is a quote by Daniel Gregory. He has a class on visual literacy, I think it's called. And it was one of the first classes that I participated in 2015. And he said, you know when it's time to make a photograph, when the object acknowledges your presence. And I really like that. And I think it is amazing. It is not talking about that you have to be probably mindful and present. It is more. You have to be that mindful and present in the moment that the object that you want to photograph acknowledges that you are there. And I I really like that. And so that means maybe it is so important, and for me it is for sure important, to calm down, slow down, be very mindful and think about what I do in the field. And in the beginning, this was completely different. So I was running around and where the light was going. And so these days, I'm just sitting down and I'm observing the nature. I want to find out what triggers me. And so I think this is an important part of the process. So Paul, your story, I'm very interested in.
Yeah, it's a quote I actually used to describe it. Like it's such a mirroring process. Like putting up a photograph to the world is such a mirror back to you, as much as when you photograph a person, it's a mirror back to them. And it took me a long time, I didn't get too caught up in the style side of things, but people started feeding back to me a level of spirituality they felt that was coming through my work, and the way that a landscape was presented to them, and what they felt was, it wasn't literal or descriptive, and it had that content to it. And it wasn't until years later I came across a quote. And my style is very receptive. I don't really go out there to make photographs. I go out there to create enough space to allow photographs in some ways to come to me. And this one quote came along, and it just kind of sat really beautifully, like a little blanket over me, when I had to come up with something that conceptualized to some extent sort of my approach. And it was, I can't remember who made it, but it was, "Spirit stands still long enough for the photographer it has chosen."
Yeah.
And that speaks a little bit to that, almost like the surrendering element of the way that I sort of choose to approach, because I feel very privileged. I'm not a religious person, but at the same time, if I have a church, it's a natural world, as it were, and it's a space that I go out to that replenishes that part of who I am, my spirituality in particular, and I feel rebalanced and revitalized in so many ways as part of it. It's been a huge part of my life, and I had a career as a wilderness therapist for 17 years as well, where I practice that with a very deliberate intentionality for other people's well-being other than my own. But it's a great parallel to this quote, and it just triggered me. Thanks for letting me share that.
I think this is such a beautiful feedback, and I think Guy Tal has an article about spirituality and the arts where he describes that in really the ancient past. And people, for example, in the caves who draw the cave paintings, for them, spirituality and the art of painting was really one thing, because it was the spirituality that was in them in order to create the art. It was part of them. And so the creative process in itself, it's probably something where we have energy from a different part of the world that fuels us up and gives us the feeling in order to create the art that we create. So I think that spirituality is a very important part of photography. Absolutely.
Certainly is. Certainly is for me. Oh, I love this. As soon as I saw this, I think you posted this recently, and I was like, oh, is this this is in the Middle East?
This is in the Empty Water, and which is one of the deserts just at the border of the Emirates. And it's a quite old photograph for me. So it's 4 years old. And in the beginning, I was fascinated by panoramic photography. And so when I was standing there in the field, I recognized there are so many photographs just in one scene. And so I needed to create that one panoramic images that shows, oh, there are all these different kind of patterns and textures that go into kind of this single photograph. And so I can easily see in this photograph 4 or 5 images. And so I think I also split it up at some point in time. But the intent was basically very simple in this photograph, because I just wanted to show the variety and the beauty in the landscapes there. I wanted to kind of picture the light and the shadows and the way they differently play in the dunes. But It was a single image, so it was not, or a single photograph. It was not a part of a bigger project, and so I like the decorative part of this photograph. But I was always unhappy that it, at least not up until today, fit into another project. So the second photograph that I show you is also from actually the same year, and it looks a little bit desaturated after the first photograph that I showed you. It was actually Blue Hour. It was on the same day in the empty quarter as well. But this photograph has a different weight for me, because for this photograph I had an intent. So this photograph basically is about a triangle. And so the triangle between the dead tree in the right part of the photograph, between the family of camels on the left side who are walking away from the dead tree. And if you see on the left side, on the far left side of the photograph, you see the end of the path. So these camels, they slowly move out of the photograph. And the last element of the triangle is the viewer. And so we are, as a viewer, we are observing basically life and death. And we can make our own decision where we want to go. And so that was the intent that I recognized when I was in the field. And I really wanted to capture this in the photograph. And so because of that, this photograph has a different level of quality for me than the first photograph. Okay, so those were two kind of single photographs that were not part of the project. And I'd like to continue with introducing our first project. I call this continuity and breaks, and there's a short description. Continuity is the presence of a complete path for steady flow. It characterizes variation without abrupt breaks. And identity is very similar, because identity is often a matter of continuity. And so basically this project is a documentation for me for the search of my own identity. I started it in 2020, and I'd like to show you a little bit how it started in order to explain you a little bit how a project evolves over time. So now here's the personal part. And so I told you that I have two different kind of backgrounds, and 42 is a very important number that we probably are all aware of. But it stands for the rational side that I have. So my father's side is a family of scientists, of workers, and they always worked very hard in their life. They are very analytical and very structured. My mother's family is a family of artists and musicians. And so the emotional side and the spiritual side was very important in that part of the family. And so throughout my life, I felt myself being disrupted in a way between this paternal side, so the scientist, the math, the rational side. You can also call it the yang, or on the other side, the maternal side. And so the artist, the music, and the emotional, also all the yin. But if you look into the yin and yang, you recognize that the idea of the yin and yang is that you have two complementary parts that are not opposing each other, but they come together in order to create something bigger. And this something bigger, I didn't recognize. And so I was really in search for this kind of, what is the bigger element? How can I bring the two different sides together? And so what I did, basically, I selected 100 of my personal my favorite photographs from my portfolio, and I studied them. I studied the patterns that I use in my photographs, and I recognized that this divide between the two sides can almost always be recognized in all my photographs. So this is a very early image from 2017. It was with a very simple camera, a very simple lens. I was skiing in the mountains and I saw that. But then later on looking at it, I recognized I can almost see the yin and yang there. I see the separation between the two different sides. And the interesting part why I created this photograph is the light and the shadow. So light is the element who is separating the two sides. But then we have the shadows of the trees who are leaning out into the other side. So it's only the shadows, those are the only elements who are leaning out to the other side. It's almost like that they search out for the other side and they want to see what is there on the other side. And then I looked into other photographs that I took. And basically, and that is the principle about yin and yang. It's called the dualistic monism. So the paradox of simultaneous unity and duality. So yin and yang as complementary rather than opposing, interacting elements to form a dynamic system in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And this, the whole is greater than the sum. I was really in search for that. And so I went through other images, and here's a collection of photographs from this work. And you see in the first row of the photographs, you see that this edge between the two sides was very prominent, but still very playful. You see a lot of round circular shapes. Often you see also light on one side and shadow on the other side. Very often you see texture on one side and a very smooth element on the other side. In the second row, you see that I was zooming into even more in order to recognize the patterns that exist. And in the last row, I recognized that now the separation between the two sides is no longer that visible. The edges, they become very sharp and very dense. And so I was asking myself, what is it telling about me? And what is it telling about my identity, my personal? And so that was the reason I created this work. And so there are many more photographs in this work, and the work is still ongoing, but I wanted to show you how by a self perspective, it's almost like art therapy. By looking at my own work and by trying to find out patterns in my own work, I recognize something very meaningful to me as a person.
It's wonderful that you've explained that the way you have. It all makes perfect sense. Without that explanation and looking at the work, it's not immediately apparent. But then as soon as you start talking about your ideas in relation to what's there, it just becomes crystal clear. And they're all wonderful studies. Every photograph by itself is a wonderful study. But putting it in that context really just takes it to the next level. And it just reminds me how important it is to talk to the artists that create the work and find out their ideas on their own work and get their interpretations, as well as make your own interpretations of their work. But I'm just fascinated. This is really fantastic.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in. I just feel like, I mean, the obvious and less obvious invitation around all of this presentation is how well you understand yourself, and how well you understand how you see what you see, and what an incredible gift and challenge to take something like this on. Where you spend that much time reflecting on your work and refining and understanding and listening to the conscious and even less conscious elements of what you created as you evolve as an artist. Like I don't know if I've actually done that in the 30 odd years I've been shooting, and I think at times, but not on this sort of scale with this level of intentionality. And I'm quietly wondering if I might take on a process like this myself. Renee, thank you.
Look, I think it's something we all should take on, really, and look into our own work and see what we can see in it. Can we see a sense of direction? Can we see a sense of our own worth, a sense of what we're actually doing? And if we can't, do we need to re-examine what we're doing and look for that sense of direction? I think that's what you're sort of getting at, really. That you've done this. You've made this reflection on your work and your life and your philosophies and art, and it all really makes sense, and I'm getting quite inspired to maybe look at my own stuff and see if I can find any order in it whatsoever. I'm not sure that I can, and I think I probably need to have a look at that.
I feel like you will, Nick. I mean, I see a lot of order in your work myself, but I think also reflecting on how we started the show, and I talked about the danger of comparison and how much time photographers in the very modern space spend comparing themselves to other people, and in terms of the nature of how we relate to other people's photography is so much of how we often define ourselves as we're developing and all the way through is through other people's work and how do we compare to others. And it's rare that I think I've come across people, that have been so deliberately defining themselves by their own work and understanding their own process so intently. And that's, I think it's really unusual and surprisingly so when you think about it. But we really don't. I don't think we often do, to be honest. We use other people's work as our whetstone of comparison.
Yeah, exactly.
To define ourselves.
I think social comparison is killing a lot, and we really need to find the connection to ourselves. And so, but thanks a lot for all the feedback. But Paul, the way you describe me, that I understand myself very well, is the way you see me. But personally, my reality is that I struggle every day. And so I ask myself questions every day. And because I struggle, because I don't give up, because I'm standing up every day, and I'm eager to find out more. And so basically that is the outcome that you'll see at the moment. But it's not that I'm in a perfect state of perception and that everything is clear to me. And the reality is really that I struggle every day.
I think it comes back to that quote that you put up earlier from the, was it sociologist? Was it Cooley? Was it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think we're in this discussion that we're having now. We're seeing that quote come to life beautifully. Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, I doubt any of us can get to a point in our lives where we have just a distinctive clarity about who we are. But what I meant to acknowledge most of my commentary was the space you've given to it and the intentionality around it and the applied process that you're presenting us with, which I think is quite unique and very special.
Thank you. I'll show you how it goes from there. So that was just the beginning and the starting point. But now I'm playing with the elements. So now the maker comes in. So this is more or less like kind of the person who reacts to the landscape. And so this is a triptych that I created just 2 years ago. And what I wanted to express through that is the idea, the title of the project is Continuity and Breaks. So you see a triptych of 3 photographs, but you see that some of the edges, they go from one photograph over into another, while other edges, they are interrupted, so they are a break. And so I'm asking myself what kind of continuity is necessary and required in order to form my identity. And also, which breaks are probably necessary. A break is not necessarily a disruption that is negative, and it could also be something very meaningful and positive for you. And this I wanted to express in this image and in this photograph. And I also was interested that there are different emotional or sentiments that I have in life. And sometimes at nighttime, I have probably a different perception about myself than in twilight or at daytime. And so I created the triptych in order to combine kind of the nighttime, the twilight, and the daytime in order to show, okay, there are different perceptions of continuity and breaks in one photograph. And that's the reason why I created them. And on purpose, I left the white area between the photographs also in order to foster or emphasize the breaks even more between kind of the different photographs. Here's another one from that series. This is just a single photograph. But what I like about that is that if you look in the far end of the photograph, you see 3 kind of dunes that are all almost meandering into infinity. but they are broken up by 3 almost parallel horizontal dunes that we see in front. It's almost like we cannot enter this continuity that goes to infinity because of these 3 walls that block us. So that's the way I felt about this photograph. And there are also other elements. So the number 3 plays a very important role in this photograph. So we have the 3 dunes in the background. We have the 3 walls, the horizontal walls in the foreground. We have the 3 bushes. And so I'm a little bit playing with these different elements.
Yeah, the organic and inorganic.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a little bit a sneak peek into this project. I'd like to show you a little bit more in order to show you also that the visual identity is different across different projects. And I chose a visual strategy that is different because of the intent that I have for the project. So this project is called Together. And I'm just reading a part of the statement. So for all the projects, I'm writing a project statement. So this ongoing body of work explores togetherness and examines the I in the we. As a social scientist, I'm interested in interconnections and the importance of social grouping for the well-being of the individual. In this work, I've conveyed how togetherness is a duality between the individual and the group, having both enriching positive, well as limiting negative aspect that need to be balanced. So how does it work? So that was the first photograph that I created for this project. It is actually in the area that I call home. So it's very close by, and we have very harsh winter conditions. They even call this area the Swiss Siberia. So although it is not very high in altitude, it's 1,400, 1,500 meters. But the conditions are really harsh, and sometimes it can get very, very cold. And what I found that there are groups of trees who always stick together. It looks like that they are needing the protection from the other trees, and in order to protect them against the harsh environments. And then when I looked at the different groups of trees, I recognized that they have patterns that almost look like the constructs that I study in my research. And so, for example, in this photograph, I recognized there are 2 trees that are departing from the larger tree. So the larger tree shows a kind of a power, and but the other 2, they seem also a little bit dependent on the main tree. And the power construct is very important in social science. And interestingly, the large tree is dead already, while the 2 departing trees are still alive. And so then I asked myself, this power, is it always negative, or can it also be positive? And this idea of positivity and negativity of the same concept brought me to the idea of inversion. And so I created the inversion of this photograph, and I flipped it around and put it together to a diptych. And so this diptych shows this togetherness for me, but one specific aspect of togetherness, which I call the power and conflict, which is one of the aspects that I study in my research. Another is attachment. Here you see 2 trees who are belonging to each other. So you see this attachment, but attachment can be very positive. So it can be on the white side, so to say, but attachment, too much attachment, can also be very negative. It can turn into a dependency. And so I wanted to show this kind of the 2 sides, the 2 interpretations of attachment in this image. This is in-group, out-group. And so very often we are part of an in-group, and we see other groups. But for us, it is very difficult to get access to the out-groups. And so in this photograph, actually, I use the main trees in the corners, and they almost form a door. And through the door, you see another group of trees in the far end. And even if you look at the horizon, you see there are also bushes in the far end. And that means, for me, it is reflective for social comparison. We almost always look into other groups and look what they have and what we don't have at the moment. And so that is a reflection on this in-group, out-group. That's a reflection of pressure. And so you see a lot of snow on this group of trees. And so they're bending down. And here I put them together in a way that they are departing from each other in order to show that because of the weight of the pressure that you see, that they are suffering probably.
Yeah, and people often tend to isolate themselves when they're experiencing those sort of things as well.
Absolutely. And here's an overview of different diptychs from this project. And I present them in an exhibition in a completely different style. They don't look like a diptych. Sometimes the black area is much taller than the white area. Sometimes I leave out, in the middle there's one tree, for example, this is a drone photograph from just one single tree. And I play a little bit with the different importance the social constructs have on me through the day of the exhibition. And so the exhibition looks completely different than this portfolio. And just wanted to give you an overview of some different photographs from this work.
No, fascinating.
Okay, two more, and just quick ones. They are more from recent work, and this is a work that I call entitled Hangman. And this project describes for me how capitalism undermines sustainability efforts in order to open a discourse between the beauty, the transience, and responsibility. The central image of this project shows a portion of a glacier's cover. I'll talk about that in a second. And there's a blanket that you can see in the upper right corner that was wrapped around itself due to weather conditions at an altitude of approximately 2,300 meters in the Swiss Alps. And the result is this figure that looks like a hangman. I'm telling you a little bit the story about the whole project. This is actually the Rhone glacier in Switzerland. You see the glacier on the right side. You also see the glacier lake. So in former days, the glacier was much bigger. And in 2018, actually, James Barlock, the photographer from National Geographic, and he wrote about a group of local people in Switzerland who were covering the Rhone glacier with a white, cheap polyester blanket in order to protect it from the rapid melting process. You see the white blanket in the center area of the glacier. And so they showed actually the Rhone glacier lost about 350 meters in length in the last 10 years. Oh. And so they showed that they can reduce the melting process by 70% through covering the glacier with a blanket. And so I was very fascinated by this aspect. However, on the other side, what is triggered by ideas of sustainability turned into a touristic event and to a touristic spectacle. So here's the cover of the glacier again with a blanket. And here's a perspective on the blanket itself. And what I like about this photograph is that the glacier is just peeking through in the right corner, in the lower right corner. And so it only has a small weight on this photograph. Here you see the different elements of the glacier, the water from the glacier, and the blanket. Here you see that the glacier or the blanket starts to be cut through because of the weather conditions. And now I'm going into this touristic element. So what they have done actually is that they have carved a path into the glacier in order to introduce people to the glacier. And the covered glacier can be visited for an entrance fee of 9 Swiss francs, I think. And the visitor can expect an approximately 100 meters tunnel through the glacier. But in order to make it secure for the tourists, they need to cut the glacier every year. They have to cut out pieces every night in order to make it available for the tourists. So that is the entrance. And then you start entering the glacier. So that is the entrance point to the glacier. You see the blank, the cover, and which turns out black, a little bit light is sneaking in. So that is the path into the glacier. So what started actually as an initiative in order to protect our environment turned out into be an event where they hurt the glacier and where they cut the glacier away. So this is the path into the glacier. And then this is the dead end of the glacier. So they've cut out an ice chamber in the glacier. And if you zoom into the walls, you see beautiful kind of small figures. But the picture, this photograph shows me that there is a dead end. So there is the path is leading into a dark hole in the end. And which simplifies for me that this whole initiative was initiated for the right reasons, but turned into something that just shows us that we are part of this capitalistic society. Yep. And so that is the main photograph of this work. And I was inspired by this hangman. I saw this hangman and I recognized, or it looks like a hangman. And the hangman is kind of characteristic for me for this whole setup. Yeah. Need to drink a little bit.
That really is quite an amazing project, and I didn't know anything about it before now. Excuse me. Anything about this blanket project, which makes perfect sense, obviously, because the white reflects and the black dirt attracts the heat, and so it makes perfect sense. But to see it turned into a circus where you can pay money to go into a tunnel where they've carved extra ice out, which of course in its sense will speed up the melting of the glacier.
Yeah.
It's just another shake your head moment, really, and thanks for bringing that to the
well, I feel like I can't judge that because I don't know the intention behind it. Like, like to me, zoos serve a very intriguing role, and that for the individuals involved, it's very debatable whether it's appropriate or what kind of experience they have relative to how they would have in the natural landscape. And yet by those individuals also serve potentially, arguably, the greater good by bringing a lot of awareness and accessibility to things they otherwise would have no understanding or connection or relationship with.
Yeah, good point.
And I don't know if that was the reasoning behind creating that accessibility to a glacier, which not many people would have the skill set or ability or time or wherewithal to go to, and they've created a little window for people to actually experience it. And one of the aspects I find in conservation is, and photographs serve a role by creating relationship with places that people don't otherwise experience, but it's still difficult to trump the reality of a definitive physical experience, which involves all the senses. So would that be an aspect of their intention around that, do you think, or you can't really comment on that? Or
I don't know. I'm fully with you. And so my work is just descriptive. And I wanted to make people think. I'm not saying that was their intention. And I'm just using this in order to describe that many of our initiatives, they come out of good reasons, but they turn out into hurting the environment even more. Yeah. And so I just want to emphasize that bipolar problem that I see and the threat, and I wanted to make people think about that. So that is the main intent.
Yeah, it's very successful in that regard, I think, Renee.
Yeah, it is. It's quite an amazing story. Regardless of your fantastic photography, I'm just quite blown away by the whole thing. That they've taken on a project so large as covering a glacier in blankets, and B, that they've studied it and shown that it works as intended, and then see the enormity of thinking, oh, we could do that all around the world, and then thinking, well, we probably can't manufacture that many plastic blankets to actually do that, and then the back to the capitalist return of 9 francs to enter the human carved hole in the glacier to touch the walls. And I guess it would depend, going back to your point, Paul, that
it might be helping to fund the project of maintaining it.
Yeah, that would be certainly part of it, and and also it's going to be rather dependent on the messaging that they provide on the ground with the tours, which I assume would be positive, and try and direct people to the greater issue being climate change, as opposed to look at this pretty ice on the cave. I mean, certainly many of the tourists that go there will want to be going there to experience the feeling of being inside a glacier and the visual and other elements that they get from that. But as long as the messaging is there as well, I suppose. But no, it's a really interesting point that you bring across, Renee, about the two elements coming together there.
So I'm also investing and donating parts of the turnover that I make from this project to the Glacier Initiative in Switzerland. It's trying to protect the glaciers, and so it's a very humble, small part of me trying to give something back for what I've realized.
No, that's terrific. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to finally show you a last project, which is relatively new from 2021. And I wanted to show you also how unfinished projects look. So this is a project I'm still struggling with. So I'm on the way. I need to go back to Iceland. I need to find out more. It's just too much on the documentary side at the moment. But I just wanted to give you an idea and what is the motivation for the project. And the project is called We Belong to Gaia. And in the 17th, James Lovelock, which was a scientist who created the Gaia hypothesis. And the Gaia hypothesis states that living species on the planet interact with their inorganic surroundings in order to generate a synergetic and self-regulating system that creates and maintains the climate and biochemical conditions that allow life to exist on Earth. In this project, I search for examples of self-regulation in nature. Just let me explain you a little bit self-regulation, the idea. And if we have a dead tree, for example, then we can see on the one hand that probably, as a dead tree is very sad and that we lost that tree. On the other hand, that tree is being used by small elements, by small animals, by small plants, for example, as a nutrition. So the tree over the years goes over into something different. Like glaciers, for example, they go over from the glacier into the water that feeds kind of the plants and the landscapes with water. And so what I'm interested is in these feedback elements where some element transitions into another and opens up a new life, so to say. The project is created in the Black Desert in the Icelandic highlands. And you see kind of the lava fields here in this main image. And you see that lava turns into being the nutrition and ground because of all the minerals and all the positive elements in the lava, and to be becoming a playground for the plants. And you see the small plants in the foreground. And this is also the main image, the main photograph that I use for Voice of the Ice. And I'm using the last project in order to transition also to Voice of the Ice now. So here is an overview of a couple of photographs from this project where I look into these transition processes where volcanic ashes, they turn into plants, where glacier, they turn into water, and through the water, they are feeding kind of the plants. There are some photographs that I believe are more powerful than others. But I still think that the self-regulation doesn't come through. And so it's not that obvious. So I really have to tell a story about it. And so I really want to dig into that a little bit more in order to find out what can I learn from these processes for myself. And in order to do that, and because of you guys, I also added a few aerial photographs from this work, from the series. That is actually the photograph that was runner-up at Natural Landscape Photography Award.
Yeah. Congratulations again, sir.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. And you see that the different elements I was talking about in this photograph. So you see the water, you see the plants, you see the volcanic ashes, And so through the clouds and the steam, you almost see also this transition at work. And so that's why I like that. A few others, and an aerial from the coastline. What I like about this is I have a number of photographs that follow this very similar pattern. You see, while it's a beautiful photograph, probably, you see on the left side the traces of the cars and that people used in order to drive through the beaches, and they left a mark on the beaches and the landscapes. And these marks, these traces, they stay there for many, many years. And so it is officially forbidden to use a car and to drive through the beaches. And you're basically destroying nature by that. And what I like about this photograph is that beauty comes together with kind of the mark. This is almost like a scarf that we, not a scarf, a scar that we, by which we hurt the landscape. A few more, and this is another aerial, and I think I added 3 of them for this presentation. What I like here is that you see now the living element, so the small birds that are flying over the landscapes. And so the landscapes, and basically what we see here in the glacier streams in Iceland, are a lot of plants in the river, in the water, and the birds, they are using the water, the plants, and as a playing field, and they find food there. And this element I like a lot. And so the birds, they look so small compared to kind of these huge landscapes that we have. That's another example with the birds. You see the birds in the upper right corner. And but they play really an insignificant role in kind of the vastness of the landscape.
Yeah, they give it scale, which is really important.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the last one where you see one of the glacier rivers, and you see that the birds, they are following the river, and which I like also a lot, because they're basically following this playground and the food. So while with every one of these photographs, I find something that interests me, I don't feel that they yet fit together. It's not one project, and so they fall apart. And so I'm struggling with this. So I'm trying to think about that. I'm usually printing my work and putting them on the floor and separating them, grouping them, and thinking about how I'd like to continue. And so this is just a starting point, but I wanted to show you that, yeah, there's a lot in progress, and that I'm thinking about how to carve out the story in a better way.
Yeah, before you sort of delved into it, gave us a little bit more insight. That was my feeling around what I'd seen from this sort of body of work, as it were, is that there's a real subtlety to its messaging that I think it takes a while for people to rest on the point or come through it, and there's still a few pieces to weave that thread through, I think, and clarify the intention around it. And I think it's partly the color hues, like there's a real, often people use a real boldness of separation of color and tones and elements in order to exemplify, that transition between the different aspects of it that tell a story. And yet there's a very subtle transition tonally and color-wise, and even in the physicality of it, of the environment that you're using to tell that story. And so I think it relies on the subtlety of people's perception as well, which is good, and it requires people to, slow down and spend time, and it's not given away. But I'm looking forward to those jigsaw pieces to sort of an extra thread to weave through and give it that cohesiveness, I think, because it's a very beautifully poetic sort of visual body of work as well, I think.
Thank you. So for me, it is really, I feel that the stories, it looks to me constructed. And however, from the beginning, I had this idea of these self-regulating feedback systems that I wanted to explore. but I didn't have enough time to really take my time and think carefully about it. But this is an example of work in progress, and I don't know where this is going to.
I think
Yeah.
you probably could have picked an easier place in the world to show those
Yeah, that's my
relationships. I think you've set yourself a high task to actually visually translate that, and I mean that not as criticism, but with your other projects that you've shown, and you've shown you've told us your intent, and to me they're very obvious. Once you give us that small amount of interpretation as to what you're showing us,
Yeah.
I could see that very clearly. In this work, you're right. It's not quite coming across the intent as easily as those other projects, which doesn't mean that the ability for you to show it isn't there in that landscape. But I think you've got you've picked a landscape that
appropriately challenges your ability.
yeah, absolutely, and I really look forward to you bringing some life to that. But with all projects, they can take a very long time, many years, and it might take you many visits to these places to be able to bring through what your original vision actually is. And to be frank, given how long you've been seriously doing photography, to get the cohesiveness of the projects together that you've already got is quite remarkable. Yeah, some might just take a bit longer than others.
Well,
No.
I'm curious about process a little bit for a few reasons. It's like, to me, there's that pre-visualization as opposed to, allowing the images to come. And I think it's a great master that has actually dedicated themselves to, in some ways, I guess, to create images from a landscape with an intended purpose already in mind, almost like bending the landscape to your will, as it were, and somehow bring that together as a body of work that doesn't feel like that's happened or that's been a part of the process. I'm quite fascinated by that. I personally find that deeply challenging to even consider taking on projects where my intention is there before I've even applied myself to the landscape. And I find a lot of my projects that have come alive have come through a receptive process first, where that message starts coming through the interaction I have with the landscape without necessarily that original intention, and it then formulates and translates over time, and then slowly the intentionality of my own starts coming into the process down the track. And it feels like that perhaps this has started quite early on in the piece in a way, and I personally would find that a lot more challenging, I think.
I think I think I'm quite similar to you. I'm also very receptive, but if I have a project in mind, then I have certain subjects that I'd like to create or that I'd like to capture, but I don't have any pre-visualization of that. And so I just have the concept in mind, what I'd like to express, or what is missing probably. But then in the field, I'm reacting, and very often I see an element that is the last puzzle in the whole mosaic that is missing. And but there are also better projects and worse projects, and some projects they need much more time. And so I just wanted to add that in order to show that, it's part of the struggle, it's part of the daily work, and that we're trying to, carve out a story. And we will see where this is going to. Maybe I erase it completely from my profile, I don't know. And I like some of the visual elements in the square photographs that I showed before. And,
I really appreciate the courage. There's a certain courage and vulnerability to expose an unfinished process, as opposed to a finished body of work. And I'll take my hat off to you, sir, because it's not always the easiest approach, but I think it offers people the most, and sometimes, and it helps people relate to their own challenges, and can offer sort of inspiration that the people we put on a pedestal sometimes that actually do go through the same struggles and processes that we all do. And I think that's That's very powerful and very helpful, I think. So thank you.
I think I don't do that on social media, because
Well, who does?
they don't. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I had in the past, but you'll get the wrong feedback because people, they're not interested in your motivation, and they just see the visual capture. And so what I really personally like is sharing work with some of my friends that are into photography as well, and getting their feedback on them and how am I able to improve kind of the story. And so I think this is very helpful. And I think it is also in science, this is a daily process. So we submit work and that is unfinished, and then we get a lot of negative review and criticism. And we have to build it in, and we have to go to another round. And very often, up until a paper is published, 5-6 years, they easily flow away up until a piece of paper is published. And I think in photography, we should also have a broader discussion and discourse about our work, which happens. There are some discussion boards, and so there's the Nature Photography Forum, for example, and there are other panels. But I think it's very nice to have this discussion and this discourse.
Well, I think, and it'll lead in naturally, I think, to the book project, which I'm looking forward to hearing about, is how somebody who, in your own words, putting a number of years on the amount of time you've dedicated yourself to with a greater intention to the craft, has developed and created relationships and connections with a lot of the great working photographers in the world. Like, how did that happen? You know, and I guess that'll come through in the story of the book anyway. But I'm very curious to hear about that.
Yeah, so we can talk about The Voice of the Ice, and which is my latest project, so to say. And so The Voice of the Ice is a collection of interviews and with some, I think, exceptional landscape photographers who have mastered their craft, but also who have something to say. And so, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that on the following slides. So maybe I start with a motivation to create this book first. In 2015, I was completely new to photography. I was so fascinated, but I recognized that I need to learn so many different things, and that I don't have a clue about how things work in photography. And so the way I learn is that I always try to seek out for the masters and learn from them directly. And so this is how we learn at university. So you have a PhD supervisor, and so you learn really from the expert. And rather than sitting in front of hours of YouTube tutorials, I thought of why should I not contact kind of the experts and go with them for workshops. And so I made a list actually in 2015 of the photographers I'm most interested in to learn from. And so actually I created this list every year and up until today, and it's a list for myself, just who are the influences of my own work every year and how these influences change over time. And so on this list, for example, was Mark Adamus, and on this list was Bruce Percy, Michael Kenner, and Guy Tal, and for different reasons, obviously. So some for the visual style. Mark, for example, Mark Adamus is an incredible, dedicated person who just loves the landscapes. And I haven't seen many people who are that dedicated like Mark is to the landscape. Guy Tal, for sure, because he has an incredible literacy and experience and philosophy about the arts and photography. Bruce Percy, because he has developed a very simplistic style and minimalistic style. Michael Kenner, he's one of the grand seigneurs of the landscape photography field. And so then I decided in 2015, if it is possible for me, and then I would like to participate in some workshops in order to learn from those. And this is basically what I did. And so between 2015 and 2018, I participated in a number of workshops. And so I got in touch with these personalities. And so I discussed with Guy Tal, with Bruce Percy, with Marcel van Osten. And so for him, for example, I was very interested in how wildlife photographers, how they create captures of the landscape and what I can learn from them for my kind of landscape photography. And so because of that, I had access to many of these personalities, and I know these personalities also a little bit more than just through the internet. And so when COVID appeared by the end of 2019, I saw already the first signs of the COVID and diffusion because I'm reading scientific papers. And so I think I was a little bit aware of what may happen about the pandemic. And so I recognized that many photographers, they needed to turn down their workshops, and they weren't able to offer any workshops. And so the first photographers, they communicated already that they suffer because their main income is kind of fading out, and because of the pandemic. And so one of the thoughts that I had is, can I do something in order to support these photographers that I learned from? And so that put me onto my own artistic path before. And can I dedicate something? Can I contribute to their way in a sense of gratitude and giving something back? The second motivation was that I think there's a big discussion in landscape photography that landscape photography is not art. And so I don't want to go into this direction, what art is and how to define art. I think this is a very complicated task. And but obviously, what people criticize is the lack of creativity in landscape photography. And I thought this is not true. So if you look carefully into some of the leading photographers in landscape in the world, then you see there's a lot of creativity going on. And creativity in completely different things from different angles. So they think about a lot. They are very dedicated, outdoor people in the field. People who are instructors who are teaching kind of about landscape photography. So they're different angles. So basically the main motivations for creating the book in 2019 was showing that creativity exists in landscape photography. And secondly, creating some form of gratitude that I can give back to the photographers that that influenced my own artistic path in the past. Beautiful. And so then I started with this idea. I created a list of photographers, and most of the photographers, what you do with a project like this, you start off with those you have access to, so that you know personally. And I was in touch already with many of them. And so I asked them, would you be interested to participate in a project like that? And then I started carefully thinking about how the project could look like. And so I decided to use the standardized interview as the method for the book. And so I wanted to give a voice to every artist in the book in order to show really their creativity, the beauty of their work, the beauty of who they are. But I wanted to do that in a sense that all the questions that I ask are the same for every photographer. And so that means you can also compare how Hans Strand replies to a question to the replies of William Neal or Mark Adamus or Thomas Heaton. And so through that method, I wanted to offer the reader also a tool through which the reader can learn kind of from the book and be inspired. Last motivation for the book was diversity. And I mean, you can never be diverse enough. And you always find groups that you probably do not integrate significantly in a project like that. But I really wanted to try and to give access to different countries, different cultural reasons, different cultural backgrounds, different gender and different age levels. I wanted to show the fine art photographer as well as the analog photographer, the landscape photographer, the YouTuber. And so I really wanted to show that they create a wonderful, beautiful work. And this is basically how I created the book. And it started by the end of 2019. And then over a period of more than 2 years, and I've went through the interviews. I set up the interview, I sent it out to the different artists. And in the beginning, I needed to convince them about the idea. And then when receiving their replies, I went over the replies like I do in science. So I review kind of the feedback and I send it back. And sometimes I send it back several rounds in order to improve kind of the message, the story. And for many of them, it was a little bit untypical. They are probably not used to get feedback. And
I was going to say, like, how would you create a level of consistency in response, that doesn't, because the different individuals have their own level of visual literacy as well in a written form, that may be exemplified more in a visual form or a spoken form, for instance. And some people might be more voluminous in terms of, the roundabout way that they get to reach the point they're trying to make. And some people are really blunt, and to create an evenness of their representation through a book, in response to all of that, it's quite a curious process. But I imagine not many people are used to such a response process as that. It's probably quite necessary, though, in order to create a cohesive book that is balanced across the different inputs.
Yeah, I think so. I took my job really serious, and it was, many were not used to that. And I mean, some chapters in the book, I printed them almost as they were sent to me in the beginning. And so they're people like Gaia or Rafael Rojas, they are writers, and William Neal, and they're writing articles for many years. But for others, I really discovered there is a deeper story. And if possible, and if they are interested to share this story, I'd like to find out more about that. And so I asked questions, and I gave a lot of feedback. And I sometimes said that, to me, this looks a little bit too negative, probably. Maybe you want to reframe it a little bit and to put it a little bit more into a positive light. But I'd really like to show the personality of who they are. And so that was the process. And I'm very thankful for all the wonderful artists that participated in the book. And the reason I didn't ask you is basically that 3 years ago, I wasn't really aware of you. And so it was through social media and over the years. And
there'd be 200,000 other photographers in the same boat, mate. So that was a joke, by the way, but at the same time, it is a very considered level of individuals that you've chosen, actually. Yeah.
I was hoping you were going to tell us that you'd taken the big red pen and put it all through Guy Tao's article and sent it back to him directly. But no, sadly not, because he didn't need it. But no, that's just looking through the list of artists that have contributed to the book. It's quite remarkable, and obviously there are lots of names that people will know. But there are certainly some that others won't, and I've clicked on a couple of their links in the voiceoftheeyes.com link to the book, and it's got the artist list, and I've clicked on a couple that I hadn't heard of before, and I'm going to have to spend a couple of days going through this, and there's the artist list now, going through this and discovering some of these other artists that I haven't been aware of, and my goodness, the work is varied and wonderful. It really is, and I think just gathering this group together for a book and to have their written thoughts is a remarkable achievement, and so well done. And tell us a bit more about the physical book itself and how it sort of flows, and of course how people can get a hold of it.
Sure. So this is a description of the kind of the facts of the book.
So anticipated everything.
30 plus 1. I like that.
So basically, it really has weight. So that means it's about 520 pages, and it's a really fine art matte paper. And we have more than 125 photographs from these photographers in the book, and 30 plus 1 photographers. I actually always had a buffer. I wanted to have 30 interviews in the book. But I thought that there's always one who decides in the end that he doesn't want to be a part of the book. And so I always had a buffer. And in the end, they all wanted to be in the book. And so they all wanted to participate. And so therefore, the final number is 30 plus 1.
I was going to ask you what your intention weight was, but you just answered.
And the book weighs 3.6 kilogram. So I guess it's really something.
Wow. Yeah.
And you can, that's actually a list of the artists that I decided and that thankfully accepted to participate in the book. Yeah. And in the last 6 weeks, I wrote Instagram stories about my why of integrating each and every one of these photographers. And so I was trying to give reason why I really wanted to have them, especially as being a part of the book. And I think they're all very different and they all offer beautiful work, but from different angles, with a different level of depth, with a different level of working procedure. But yeah, I think the work is beautiful. And in the end, I'm really super happy about the outcome of the book. So you can order the book at voiceoftheice.com. And so we've created a website. I've created the whole book by myself. So it's a self-publishing project, so to say. And so I was kind of the art director behind the book. So I created the content and all the look. And I had a partner, a friend of mine, and he was responsible for all the back-end work. And so the logistics, the distribution, which is really super complicated. And this year was particularly difficult because there was a shortage of paper, for example. The prices of paper, they increased dramatically. The delivery costs, they are horrible this year. And so it's really not the best year to self-publish a book. And we've decided to create this landing page and to start selling the book by ourselves. And before we may enter the big platforms like Amazon, because you easily have to get away 18% just for being listed on a platform like Amazon. And the main idea of the book is also what I said in the beginning, that we're giving royalties back to the artists. And so if you publish with a publishing house, and if you are an experienced writer and if you have a reputation and a name, you probably receive something like 10% of royalty. And I decided to give the 10% of royalty back to the artists in the book. And therefore, it was quite clear to me is that it doesn't work with a publishing house. So that if I want to give something back to the artists, and then I have to self-publish the book by myself. And so then from every book, 31 percentage of these 10% are giving back to all the artists. And that's my form of a form of gratitude for participating in this project and for inspiring me over all these years. I've also...
Oh, you go. Oh, please finish.
I also wanted to just add that I played my own role completely down in the book. So there's no chapter about me. There are no answers about me because it was really, I was only the curator of the book. And so I'm playing in the background and I'm giving the scenery to the famous artists.
Very, very humble of you, Rene. That's a massive undertaking, absolutely massive. And I've only been I've probably been a part of about 5 or 6 published books, but only collectively and never on my own. So I've just had enough of a taster of what it might be to take on something this big by yourself. 2 things I'm curious about. You may or may not want to answer them. Is the initial funding behind its creation, and 2, the practical reality of a 3.6 kilogram book in terms of how accessible that is now going to be around the world with shipping costs and your choices around creating it with that physical bulk and weight around it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest challenge at the moment, and we've seen we're using a Shopify backend, and so you get all the statistics, and we see that there's a lot of interest, especially from the US, also from Australia, for example. But the delivery costs are really they are fighting against the sales of the book.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the shipping costs to the US, they are just incredibly high. So they are more than 60% of the cost of the book. But this is a situation that I cannot change, and at the moment, and so we're really trying to seek out to the people. We're starting with the campaigns from next week on. I'm also trying to give interviews for the book, and there are some features also and product reviews in some magazines. I think On Landscape is coming, and some others. And so hopefully, yeah, people will find it inspirational. I can honestly tell you, and I'm really, it sounds strange because I'm the curator of the book and behind the book, but I really believe it is something unique, and it is something that hopefully goes with you and inspires you for many years. And you will not read the book at once, but from time to time, you will go into one chapter or another chapter. And I think for myself, when rereading the chapters, I always find something new and some new angle. And I hope everyone else will be inspired as well.
Yeah, to me, I see it as an investment. No, it is not. In fact, you would probably be a disservice to try and go through that book all in one go, because you wouldn't sort of give it enough space for reflection for what you're being offered. So I'm with you in that regard, and but I'm knowing enough about books and the physical cost of getting them around the world at the moment. That was when you said 3.6 kilos. I was like, oh my Lord, that just set all the red flags of what you must be going through from a distribution point of view. And I guess, is it partly because of just the caliber of paper stock that you wanted to use, or the weight of the covering, or what led to that sort of physicality?
I mean, it's 520 pages and it's 170 paper, so it's quite of a thick, fine matte paper. You cannot create a book with an outstanding group of photographers and then presenting it in a very sloppy way on a cheap paper. And then when you have more than 500 pages, you need to have a hardcover, and a soft cover will just not cover the book well. And the last reason is just I was too naive in the beginning. I wasn't thinking about the logistics and the distribution. And now I see all these problems coming, and I just wanted to create the contribution through the book. And now I have to cope with it.
Is it? I wonder, because I'm looking at the production of a few books myself at the moment, and one aspect I was considering is the legitimacy of an ebook as opposed to a physical book, relative to the accessibility that it will ultimately give so many more people, as opposed to, the deep honoring of the craft by having it in a legacy printed form, and those two things are weighing up with me quite a lot, because there's a huge limitation on a physical product in terms of who is actually going to have access to it ultimately, and there's very few people in the world, particularly working photographers, that don't have an accessibility from a computer sort of platform of some kind, and yet I'm aware that it either completely belittles or minimizes the beauty of the craft to some extent, at least for us and the older generations anyway. Younger generations, that's probably been largely their main exposure to the visual realm, and will continue to be so. But it's yeah, hats off to you for the legacy of it. Like this is going to be stay here beyond your lifetime, and there's not many people in the world and the realm of photography that can say that about anything. And I really feel quite deeply about that. Like I admire the humility of not acknowledging yourself with the way you could have, and yet at the same time I've got enough awareness and understanding of to get a hint of just the immensity of what you've actually created and what's gone behind it, and the fact that you've done so much of it on your own.
Thank you. Appreciate it a lot. And I hope it inspires others to share their voice as well. And I think we need to have these voices to come out, that people talk about their intent when creating art. And this is the beauty of it all. And so I really hope that the book inspires others to follow and with their books, with their ideas.
Well, I
And
think one of the things that really stands out to me that says a huge amount about you is the fact that all these artists said yes. And these are very significant artists, a lot of them, and a lot of the greatest, arguably living photographers in the world with a lot of decades of centuries worth of experience behind them collectively, and they believed in you enough to consistently, all of them, to be a part of this, and that's a huge nod to you as well. I would like to acknowledge.
No, I agree.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, because that and for someone who also hasn't necessarily been in this field for a huge length of time relative to some of them, that they see something, some quality in you, and they have their own parallels with the intentionality of what you're trying to create, and the fact that you presented something in such humility, and also with the intention of gifting back so much to the community and the artists themselves, both literally and figuratively. That's a wonderful array of elements that few publications could that I know of in the photographic world, probably none really, that I'm aware of, that have all of those aspects woven through its creation.
thank you. I appreciate that. And so, yeah, the Earth was good to me, and I was able to convince them, and I'm very grateful. Yesterday, I just
I'd love to have been there with answered some of those feedback emails. That would have been great. I'd love to get a B-roll film of them opening up some of those emails.
Definitely. I mean, if you talk to landscape photographers, so most of them, they're in the field, and so they're not available, and so the operational procedure is of interest for sure as well. And but they all are really, honestly, they are wonderful personalities, and I like if personalities have their edge. So if you can really see the personality behind the person, and I really like that, and so I appreciate all of that. And just yesterday, I signed all the artists' copies, and I wrote personal notes of gratitude for each and every one of the photographers.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm sending back the books to the photographers, and it was a very special moment yesterday for me. And yeah, hope it'll work, and hope they like the book.
Yeah, look, I've been involved in much different book creations with photographers, and it's like herding cats at times. So you've done very well to coordinate the photographers into such which is no doubt a very cohesive project. And going back to Paul's point that clearly these artists have seen something in you to put their trust in you, it really hasn't taken me the full 2 hours of this show to see why that's the case, because you really do have a special way of putting things, of arranging your thoughts, and of placing those thoughts back to an audience, and I've really got that tonight, and so it's pretty clear to me that only a short amount of interaction with you would have convinced anyone to be part of such a project. So congratulations.
Thanks a lot. I've received so much appraisal today, and so it's almost Christmas for me. And
well, it's so easy to let that slide over, and that's fine. That's part of who we are. But next question, and I guess it's maybe a little bit premature because the book hasn't necessarily had its place in the world, but I guess you would have already thought about it to some extent. Is where to from here for you, both in the book realm potentially, or where do you see yourself heading in 5 or 10 years time, like with your work? Like, what role is photography going to have, a different role? Is it going to have a different space in your working life relative? Are you still going to just keep it in parallel? Obviously it's in a short period of time it's become a very significant part of your life. Is that evolving further, or you're happy where it is now, or where to from here?
I think Irish people, they tend to say today is today and tomorrow is tomorrow, and so I try not to think too much into the future. And so there are new things coming next year, and for sure now that I've almost finished the book process. Now I'll have to do some campaigning about the book. But I really want to come back to my own work, and which I have completely downplayed in the last year. I haven't published anything in the last year, and although I've done a lot, but I'd really like to come back to my own work. And then next year, I'm going to offer two things that are new to me. One is a workshop that I'm planning, and which is a workshop on identity. So I really wanted to offer a workshop that is completely different than many other workshops I see. And I'd like to work with individuals on their identity and carving this out a little bit more through their work. A second thing that I'd like to offer in the next years is a very personal project. And so I'd like to invite people who are in seek for the peace and for creative inspiration, for finding themselves, for seeing the motivation to reconnect to themselves. I'd like to create them a space where they can meet and in order to find this identity together. And I'd like to help people to be on this path. So this is not a financial project for me, but something that I hope that I'm able to give something back to individuals who are in need of having that. So I'm thinking about how to design it, how to create this project, and maybe I go to exactly the same place where I've been in my creative retreat. And so that is on my mind for the next year. And my university job stays the same, and I still have a lot of fun. I have a wonderful employer, so the University of Zurich is giving me lots of flexibility, and which is really wonderful. It's also, on the other hand, is a lot of hard work, and but I really enjoy having the two sides again. So we started with the two sides, and we're ending with the two sides and trying how to combine them probably. And this is the last thing I wanted to say, and to finish kind of my official part and the presentational part, coming back to that quote that I had in the beginning, and I am who I think you think I am. That was the beginning probably for me many years ago. And today I think it is more about I am myself, and it's more about I am and who I am as a person and how I can contribute to the world. And I hope that everyone else is motivated to reconnect to themselves and to show vulnerability and to show who they are as a person. And through that, we can hopefully create a better world. And yeah, that's my end. Thanks.
Wonderful way to end it, Renee. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute privilege to have you on the show tonight. And I think this is one we've had many great shows, but I think this is one that we'll look back on as one of the real highlights. So thank you so much for exploring your thoughts and work with this. It's been a real privilege. So thanks again.
Thanks a lot. My pleasure too.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time, Rene, and yeah, it's gone even beyond what I was hoping we'd be able to cover, and you've made it so easy for us by just creating such a beautiful structure and continuity of flow at the same time with this honesty about the discord of both within yourself and the dual life that you lead and the dual aspects of who you are and where you've come from and what defines who you are with family. And I think the element of self-awareness has been a huge aspect to tonight's presentation in particular. And you know, the actual grassroots reality of how far you're committed to that, you know, spending 2 months by yourself, literally just coming back from that. And few people who have done that in their lives or probably ever will in our culture in particular. And I feel like, you know, you're just a person that walks the talk. And there's simple words to say, but they add so much credibility and integrity to what you present, because that comes through both energetically and on so many other levels. And to have the visual literacy and the conceptual strength to feed back, you know, such complex and quite difficult concepts to simplify, I think is a gift that you clearly have that few people do. And I'm sure all the different aspects of your professional life benefit from that in so many different ways. And I would be quite astonished to see how you ultimately, I guess, what's the word? Bring that to life in a form in a workshop. Like I imagine that'd be quite astounding. Like I'm not a newbie to this realm, and yet I feel like I was sitting here like a school kid on the end of a seat when you're going through some of your presentation. I'm like, oh my God, I never thought of that. Or what a way to put it. And it's just really exciting and it's really inspiring. And it's really like just such a good reminder. There's just so much more to learn if you're just open and you welcome, people to come into your life from all sorts of walks and forms and backgrounds, as yours is so different from so many working photographers today. And I think that's part of why you are who you are, is that you bring these aspects of and these abilities to define and conceptualize and compartmentalize and simplify aspects, because you just spent so much of your time like sifting through data and looking into relationships and conceptually and intellectually, as well as having your sort of music and art background as well, which we didn't really delve into. So yeah, I really personally hope this is the start of a friendship, at least that I would love to personally continue. And I hope I get a platform. I don't know if I've got the depth of Guy Tal to offer in terms of reflective capacity, but I've certainly got my own sort of well of life and vulnerability and courageousness that I'm happy to offer. So if at any time you feel drawn to do so, my door is very wide open, sir.
Same here. Thanks so much. Yeah. And same here. So I'm very much looking forward to meet you in person one day. And so please do, whenever you are around in Switzerland or in Europe, give me a call. And I'll do the same in Tasmania. And so if I go to the other side of the world, and I'll give you a call. And I would really appreciate sharing some aerial work or seeing your beautiful landscapes as well. And meet in person. I think the personal contact is the one thing that tops everything else. And so the landscapes are just the byproduct.
Well, I have been to Switzerland, as we were discussing before the show, and it's really struck me as somewhere quite significant that I want to spend some time. And there's certain characteristics to the people and the culture there that are so different from over here that I feel like I've got a lot to learn from, and I personally feel like as a nation, your capacity for neutrality and balance, and the way you sort of people are very quite capable of being direct and clear and defining things, and that's something that I struggle with in my life. And just being around a culture of people that have a lot of that capacity is probably a really good thing for me. And I'm currently hoping to do 3 different trips to the Northern Hemisphere next year, and some of them have gaps in between, and I'm already thinking, well, what do I do in the gaps? Is there somewhere I can go and stay in between? So
you'll end up on your couch. Keep away.
So it may happen sooner than we think, hopefully. And hardly anyone knows Tasmania better than Nick Monk. So if you get down here, I've been a guide here for 20 years, so I know it reasonably well as well. But Nick's got another 20 years at least on me, and Luke as well, obviously. So yeah, that would be incredible to spend time.
Welcome you with open arms down here, and and certainly if I ever get over to Europe, which is more and more unlikely every day, but I'll come and visit for sure. But I think ultimately, and we really need to wind up, Paul, but ultimately, I think everyone that's watched this will go away thinking about themselves and thinking about their work and thinking about
who they are, what does it mean, where can I go from here? And I think that's ultimately what you've really brought tonight, a sense of ultimately self-reflection in our own lives and in our photography. So thanks again, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys.
And all the best for the book. All the best, very best of the book. May the storks fly them around the world.
Hopefully. Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Renee.
Stay tuned for the 100th show. It's coming up.
All right, bye.
Good night.
Good night, thanks.